everybody. Welcome back to the Furlough Podcast. On the show today, we have Richard Green, former IRS agent, author, Agents of Deceit. Welcome aboard, Richard. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Chris. How are you?
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. I've been reading your book. I'm about halfway done with it. And I have to say,
Oh,
it is really fascinating. I've got a few little markers on here. And
mhm.
first of all, if a lot of people don't know who you are, they really need to get this book. I think a lot of people don't understand what the IRS is, what they do, and what they can do to you if you don't play by the rules, if you will. And
Right.
I
Hmm.
think it's important. I think it's important for us to know. We just think we pay taxes. We get, if we're lucky, we get a tax return. And all that different stuff. But
Right.
you were an IRS agent for quite some time, and there's lots of parts of this book I want to get into, but we'll get started by saying, what made you want to be an IRS agent?
Well, I had an unusual backstory. My dad was a fundamentalist preacher in the Deep South, and so I always was conditioned to think in terms of the whole world as being sinners that were going to hell, and it was my job to straighten them out.
Wow.
So when I got to had a chance to go with the IRS, I considered that a sign from God, because now I could bust these lousy taxpayers and help fight for truth and justice in the American way. So I was extremely naive when I went into the IRS. And the sobering thing was that I discovered that the IRS is a cult, just like a religious cult. They're highly suspicious of outsiders. They consider themselves indispensable. They have core doctrines that aren't necessarily the law, and
Wow.
they expect unquestioned authority.
And that was, I'm glad you mentioned that part, because when I was reading the book, there was a point in here, and I don't want to give too much of the book away because I really want people to buy this and read this, but there was a little segment in there, a little nugget you had, where a female IRS agent was so upset because she went to talk to somebody's accountant, and she couldn't believe the accountant wouldn't just fold to all her, basically her requests. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but to me, I found that was amazing, that she just thought that she had absolute power to ask anything and everything, and the person's accountant was just going to do whatever she said. And people forget that your accountant is almost like your lawyer. He or she is there to represent you.
Yeah, well, a few years before that, the IRS had actually gone to court to make it legal, or to forbid CPAs from having confidentiality. They agreed that lawyers should have confidentiality, but CPAs shouldn't have confidentiality. They should be essentially an arm of the IRS. Well, fortunately, the IRS lost, so you can trust your CPA to some extent.
Yeah. It's just weird that at what point, do you say, things are unconstitutional? And you talk about the big guy that was teaching your course when you first showed up, and how adamant he was that not only was everybody a tax cheat, but some were worse than others, and we had to do, we as an IRS have to do whatever we can, to prove that they're doing something wrong, whether you see anything wrong or not. That was amazing.
Yeah, the presumption of innocence on the part of the taxpayer is a quaint anachronism.
Well, what did you take out of when your time there, at what point, how long were you there before you started feeling like you had to get out?
Well, it was gradual. They eventually really started harassing me, and I had to take sick leave, and then they just fired me.
Wow.
But you don't need to feel sorry for me because I had a very good lawyer who got me a very generous settlement for the harassment, tax-free. So
Wow.
it turned out pretty good.
Can you discuss what kind of harassment it was going on, or is that something that was an agreement that you can't discuss?
Uh, I can discuss some of those. One of the most mundane was that the IRS has very flexible work hours. One of our managers said that if she only gets 5 hours work out of us per day, she's happy. So you can take long lunch breaks. You didn't really have to worry about being there exactly on time. But when they started harassing me, then they started documenting me by the minute. Everybody else got to come pretty much as they did, as they wanted to, but I couldn't. Well, fair enough. I started keeping a strict schedule. Then they started a whisper campaign. But the thing that was really broke the camel's back was I had sent a memo to my manager just to cover myself because she wanted me to get make a fraud case against the taxpayer because he'd hired a prominent attorney. The IRS's feeling was that if you hired an attorney, you were probably guilty. You were worried about going to jail. And he was also a ethnic minority. And we had been told in our workshop that you could identify usually ethnic minorities by their surname. Like if they're South Korean, like if they're South Korean, it's Kim. If it's Armenian, it ends in IAN or JIN, and there's certain others. And so he was one of these ethnic groups, and that really struck me that before the guy even shows up, before you look at anything, you just go by his surname, and he's guilty until proven innocent. So I wrote her a memo because I wanted to be on record for her, and I wanted to make sure that if it was possible, that justice would be served.
Right.
Well, a few days later, 2 armed thugs showed up on my doorstep. Now, the IRS formerly had a division called the Internal Security Division, or what they called inspection, and their sole task was to criminally investigate naughty IRS agents.
Really?
Yeah. And so here these goons show up at my doorstep. My wife was at home, my kids, they had no idea what was going on. And they made sure that we could see their guns. They had shoulder holsters, so, they kind of stretched their arms so we could see that they were armed. And of course, I began to wonder, what could I have possibly done? I knew I hadn't asked anybody for a bribe, and I certainly didn't try to beat up anybody. And I mean, I couldn't even imagine what I've done that would warrant a criminal investigation.
Right.
So I asked them, I said, what are you investigating me for? And they said, insubordination.
Are you
And
serious?
seriously, and the insubordination was because I had disputed my manager's claim that a person shouldn't be audited strictly because he has a lawyer and he's an ethnic minority.
Right.
So they said, well, we still need to talk to you. And I said, well, not without my union rep. So that kind of sobered them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to go in with my union rep to their office, and it was kind of a softball type of interview, and
Yeah.
nothing came of it. But
What did they did they end up closing the case as far as, or was it just something that they could put on your record?
well, both. I mean, they document everything, so uh, they could say that I was investigated by inspection, and supervisors and other superiors would know that I had apparently been in some pretty serious stuff, even if they didn't know the details.
Right.
It was intimidation as well as putting a turd in my folder.
That's right. That's right. So what, it seems like a lot of this stuff in the beginning of the book talks about that, as far as um you basically, all our transactions that we can make can be by FinCEN. Is that how you say it? They can track all electronic financial.
Yeah, uh, there's an agency called the well, it's an agency of the U.S. Treasury.
Mm-hmm.
It's called FinCEN, which stands for Financial Crimes Enforcement Network,
Mm-hmm.
and they track every single financial transaction you do. If you use your credit card to buy a dollar big gulpy, that goes on to your FinCEN report. If a bank deems that your behavior is suspicious, like if you deposit $6,000 in your bank account and didn't have a good reason, they issue a suspicious activity report. And
Mm-hmm.
by law, those are confidential. Nobody knows how many SARs are issued or what generates them. And
Mm-hmm.
so, what the IRS can do, they can request FinCEN to turn over all of your transactions. And they have to notify you that they've requested the information from FinCEN, but they don't have to reveal the information or anything. And so they can literally go through all of your financial transactions, except cash transactions that weren't deposited into a bank, and build a case against you. And furthermore, they have the authority to just confiscate it from the bank account
And that's
without
what one of the
notifying.
questions. I'm glad you're. Yeah, there was a story, and I hope I'm not telling a lie on the story, but there was a guy that owned a coin business in the upper East Coast or something like that. That, not probably, if the story's true, I might be telling it wrong, but I'll just regurgitate what I was told, was something to the effect of a guy that he owned a coin business or some sort of business, and he dealt a lot in cash, and he was putting money in weekly, and I guess it generated one of these, and they ended up
Mhm.
taking all the money from his account, like all of it, and it was in the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and he had to spend like 30 grand to get most of it back, and he didn't even get all of it back. if I may be telling that wrong, but and apparently that's something that happens quite a bit. That they can just seize
No,
your cash.
yeah, unfortunately, you're pretty right, Chris. The
Oh,
Inspector General for the Department of the Treasury actually did a report a couple of years ago on the very same issue, and the majority of the funds that the IRS ultimately ultimately seizes, the majority of funds come from legitimate businesses like laundromats, convenience stores. They do deal in a lot of cash, and they don't want to keep it in their store or it's subject to robbery. So yeah, they'll deposit $5,000 a day into their bank account, maybe
mm-hmm.
10. I mean, really high cash. But the inspector general found that much of that was being seized. People think, well, they only seized money from drug pushers or corrupt, but the vast majority of funds that are seized by the IRS are from legitimate, law-abiding businesses.
And they had
And
a
I have that report I reference in my book, and I have it in the appendix in case anybody wants to wade through it.
they had a going off track just a little bit, but they had a similar issues with police departments doing the same thing. And where if somebody got pulled over and they had $2,000 on them, a couple grand, the cops could seize it for suspicion, and a lot of these people weren't getting the money back. And to me, that's just crazy. Now if you had a tractor trailer load of cash, I could see suspicion, but if you got you know $2,000 on you, and you're traveling, state trooper pulls you over, I just don't see how that's, and I think they've reversed a lot of those powers, but I just find it amazing that as a society, we just, we fold up, and people just consider it, par for the course.
Yeah, well, there was a town in Texas called, I think it was Pineville, and there was a casino a few miles away. And so police would actually stake out the roads and confiscate cash. And there's a legal distinction. They didn't even need probable cause to seize it. They had a lower standard called a preponderance of evidence, which basically says that if the cops claim that it's illegal, they can. And you're right, they'd have to go to court, and often the cost of getting it back was more than they had seized.
Mm-hmm.
But the states have pretty much reduced that. It still happens, but there was so much outrage that many state legislatures made it much more difficult. Like some states say that you have to actually be convicted of a crime
Mm-hmm. That's
before they
amazing.
can seize the money.
And where they can take it. Now, in your book also,
Right.
and this surprised me, and it kind of took me off guard a little bit. Um, I didn't realize that the IRS considers themselves part of the thin blue line.
Oh, yes.
How is that? And what is that? And apparently, I mean, I don't know how long the phrase thin blue line has been out. I mean, I have a lot of police officers and family members that are police officers, friends and whatnot. And but this seems to be back from the 80s, and I was just kind of perplexed by the fact of why. I mean, to me, I always thought that the thin blue line was be, your average criminal, maybe robber, murderer, rapist, whatever. But I don't understand how I guess stealing from, if they feel like we're stealing from the government or whatever, their due taxes, I guess they can it's all criminal. But I just don't understand how how they consider. And if I'm not mistaken, Social Security considers themselves the same as well.
Mhm. Well, the IRS has two mantras, two core doctrines, just like a fundamentalist sect does. And the mantras are, number one, nobody likes paying taxes. And number two, there's an awful lot of fraud out there. Uh, the suspicion just feeds on itself because you get a bunch of agents talking about their cases and their suspicions. If I was still with the IRS and I reported to work tomorrow and I said, I had a real nice chat with a talk show host. He seemed like a great guy, but personally, I think he's just covering up something. He's really doing something. I just feel it. Maybe he's giving a lot of talks and paid in cash.
Mm-hmm.
And the sobering thing is, nobody would challenge me and say, well, Green, you're crazy. What evidence do you have? What does he do that makes you suspicious? Nobody would challenge me. They would just grimly nod and agree with me. So that feeds my suspicion that I really am right. Anybody that I have the least suspicion is essentially guilty.
Do you think that happens a lot? And I feel comfortable asking you this question because you live that lifestyle for a while. Do you think that happens with people when they get some level of power or entitlement, if you will? And I hate to use the word entitlement, really, but just some sort of authority where they just kind of you start out good, but if you're not careful or check yourself, you can almost feed into, like what you're saying, almost to where you just feel like you can do whatever it is you feel you need to do.
Well, Lord Acton 200 years ago uttered the famous cliche, power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So I think you're spot on. And the vast amount of power, I mean, it's virtually absolute for the IRS in reality. So yes, I would say that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I'm not the first one who knows that.
Well, do you have any? Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. Did you work with anybody that you felt like had the same views as you as was going on? Did you start, maybe either having conversations or making eye contact with somebody, going, something's a little fishy going on around here?
Yeah, there was quite a bit of widespread sentiment that most people were a lot more prudent than I was, and they would be very careful about voicing their opinions.
Right.
One of my friends who is very sympathetic was a lawyer. Well, he didn't say anything overtly, and he eventually became a tax lawyer making a six-figure income. Well, he tread carefully because he didn't want to risk a lucrative career as a tax advisor, ultimately. Right. So people do have their personal agendas. I just got to the place where I figured, what the hell do I have to lose? I didn't really think about suing them until they actually fired me, so it wasn't like I said, well, I'm going to do what I want because I'll sue the bastards and get a very good judgment. So it wasn't that. It just sort of built up, and I guess it goes back to my religious upbringing. I was a little bit self-righteous. That conscience comes before anything else. And you should be open about it.
Do you think, in your personal opinion, that we should get rid of the IRS? Do you think it was something that's maybe outused its surface?
Oh, yes, there's quite a few number of people, and even politicians, who want to replace the IRS with a national sales tax. And I discussed that in the last chapter of my book about disallowing the IRS. It is
Chapter
available on
11.
Amazon.com. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And essentially, what we could do if we had a national sales tax of 16%, we could eliminate the IRS except for a skeleton force to make sure the sales tax is being paid to the government, but they wouldn't have any influence over the individual citizen. And a 16% rate sounds high, but it would be a revenue neutral approach where we wouldn't have to close any loopholes for the rich or cut back on welfare programs for the poor.
Mm-hmm.
Everything, we'd have the same defense capability, everything that we have, except it could be paid for by a 16% sales tax instead of a IRS tax. You know, most people I talk to, such as yourself, the IRS, you know, like I said, always says everybody hates to pay taxes. Well, most of the people I talk to, they're not thrilled about paying taxes, but they're realists. They understand that in a democracy, they do need to pay for government. And there might be arguments over how much government should get, but everybody accepts the necessity of taxes. What the big issue, and it's just like our conversation, the big issue is not that we're paying too much in taxes, or we shouldn't be paying any taxes, or we should cheat on our taxes. The big issue is the corruption within the IRS that makes them a law unto themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's the issue. It's not paying taxes.
One of my big issues about paying taxes is the combination of it all. It's like, okay, you pay, occupational tax. You have all your taxes that come out of your check, and then you pay a sales tax, and then you pay another sales tax on that. It just seems like every time you buy a car, you're paying a sales tax on it. Then you turn around, buy more tax on your tag, and then it's just like it's that compounding interest, if you will. If we'll use gasoline for example, gas stations pay their cost of what it is plus the tax that goes on it. Then you turn around and pay a sales tax on top of that tax that's added to the gas per gallon. It's combination upon combination.
Well, yeah, that does get frustrating, but I don't know how we can just completely eliminate taxes of some sort.
Right.
But see, the alternative would be if we had a national sales tax, the transaction would be done. If you went out and bought a car and paid the tax on it, and then your sales tax and whatever else, it might be painful at the time and even frustrating, but that's the end of it. You're not going to get a letter 6 months later that says, hey, you owe a sales tax of $10,000 on your car purchase, and if you don't pay it if you don't work out a payment arrangement within 30 days, we're going to put a lien on your home. Taxes are always going to be painful, but it's like rinsing the boil. It's done, and they would be. You raised another point, which is very valid, is that a simple sales tax would be transparent, you wouldn't have all these other hidden taxes. Now, the states would be different. Whatever the state decides to do would be independent of the federal government, except for broad constitutional issues.
Mm-hmm.
But, again, I haven't heard people really complain about state sales taxes. Yeah, they might whine. I bought a car and God, I had to pay $800 in a sales tax. But people kind of shrug, and they understand the necessity. The state sales tax people do not have a reputation as thugs and as people who are out to put you in jail, even if you don't know exactly why you're going to jail. And it gets back to absolute power. The IRS is probably about the only institution in the IRS that comes the closest to absolute power.
Do you think when you said something that made kind of a light bulb go off, and there was, and I ask you because I've never really talked to anybody that's ever worked for the IRS and that'd be willing to openly say it. What do you think about, or have you? And then this kind of goes off of the deceit part, in my opinion. But what about when somebody passes away and they leave you, a house or this and that, and I haven't been fortunate enough to leave anybody leave me anything other than bills, but there seems to be, some sort of tax, almost like I don't want to say a property gains, but some sort of inherit, if you come into money,
Yeah, a state tax.
That's crazy to me. I mean, it's like you can't leave anybody anything, and it's like, didn't they already pay taxes on what they're leaving you, and now you're going to tax it for giving it to somebody? That's just a head scratcher to me.
Yeah, that is a policy issue, and there's a good argument for no estate tax, but then the other argument is that on the super wealthy, it does redistribute the income.
Okay.
But the IRS administers it. So whatever problems they are with the state taxes, the IRS only compounds it. Let's get the 16% sales tax, get rid of the IRS, and then we can start having policy deduction discussions. I might say, well, I'd like to see the sales tax sink to 15% if we tax billionaires 10% of their estate. I mean, you could very well and reasonably disagree with me and say, no, I don't think that's fair. I think we should keep it at 16% and not tax them at all.
Right.
We could at least have a rational, understandable discussion, and we would both know what we were talking about.
Versus all the confusion of all the loopholes.
Right. And there are loopholes for state taxes.
Yeah, I think we could talk for days and days on this, and I'm not going to bend your ear too much. And I just wanted to really let everybody know about this book. And it's kind of funny. I always tell people this. I don't read a lot of books because life is so fast paced for me. But I got to reading this book. And because I wanted to definitely know what I was talking about with you, and before I realized it, I'm all the way into chapter 11, which is pretty much the end of the book, except for a lot of your information. Almost like the second half, you have all this legitimate information, scanned in, financial audits, IRS fiscal years, and things of that nature. And I think people really need to read this book, and I think it will help them understand when they go to vote for their politicians.
Yeah, I tried to simplify it because it was confusing for me. I mean, it took me a long time to understand the reports, but I did try to simplify it. in that chapter 7, and then I gave footnotes for the reference in the complicated government reports, just in case you're one of the tenths of 1% of policy wonks that like to go into that stuff. And you can see that I was truthful. I didn't just make the stuff up as a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, and that's what I loved about it.
Yeah, I think that yes, I agree with you. The reports are pretty daunting, and I would be surprised if 1 in 1,000 go through the reports. But I felt like they were necessary. They were necessary because, of course, I don't know who the 1 in 1,000 will be.
Absolutely. Well, I definitely want everybody to check this book out. Again, we've had on Mr. Richard Green, former IRS agent, author, Agents of Deceit, the true story of life inside today's chaotic and dysfunctional IRS. You can get this book on Amazon, anywhere else we can get this book. Is it in your major stores?
Well, you can order it to my website, agentsofdeceit.com. And I also have a Twitter account that I update with IRS information, some of the bizarre things they do. And that the Twitter account is IRS Whistle.
IRS Whistle. Okay.
Right.
Excellent. Well, Mr. Green, I'm not going to keep you too much any longer, but I appreciate you coming on the show. And for everybody listening to the show, make sure that you listen to us on all the different things. We are on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, iTunes, YouTube, any place that you get your information from, get your podcast from. So make sure you like, subscribe, comment, give us feedback, and go to Mr. Green's Twitter page, engage with him, ask him questions, and definitely, if nothing else, you need to buy this book, Agents of Deceit, and check this out. Mr. Green, we have really enjoyed having you on today.
Okay, well, I really enjoyed it. You really inspired me. I usually don't rant like this.
Well, I am a ranter. I am a ranter for sure. And we'd love to have you back on. I've got your contact information, and especially after all this pandemic stuff is going on, and how this is really going to affect everybody with their pay and taxes and different things like that. We should come back and revisit this and talk about the future of this country and its economy and how it deals with the IRS.
Yeah, that'd really be great, Chris.
All right. Well, we look forward to it, and I appreciate you coming on to the show, sir.
Okay, you bet. Talk to you later.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.